Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, did you know there's a skill many men never learn that ends up seriously limiting your professional success and satisfaction in your love and sex life? I put together a free guide to explain this unknown skill and give you exactly what you need to use it today. Get it by heading over to ShaynaJamesCoaching.com or text the word ALIVE, A-L-I-V-E, to 44144. That's 44144. You'll also get access to Man Alive outtakes, raw footage, and bonus videos you can only get there. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm excited to be here today with Rick Sharp. Rick, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Shayna. Nice to be speaking to you finally.
Yeah, we are going to talk about the topic of breakups and healing through breakups. We haven't done an episode on breakups yet, I had realized.
Yeah.
And the journey that a breakup can be, or the wake up, I would say, that a breakup can be. Because, as Rick, I'll give him a little bit of an introduction in a moment, but as Rick wrote in his book, The Price of Heartbreak, a lot of men are conditioned, as we've seen, to not feel and not have this awareness or acceptance of the inner world and the inner emotional world. And breakups can actually be a really powerful wake-up call into, oh my gosh, there's this part of me that I haven't cared for. So, thank you, Rick, for being willing to share your journey and the challenges and the struggles and, the depth of what this is all about.
Yeah, depth, interesting word. And it is actually because, lots of people in different relationships, they always end up wondering why they end up in the same boat, and why they end up with the same results, and eventually, and I was no different, to be quite honest. I'm sort of later in life, 60 years old. And at some point you have to realize that, gosh, like, why is this always happening? So that started the journey towards looking at where I was, why I was thinking the way I was thinking and acting the way I was acting, and trying to put those things together so that I could actually change, what I was doing, because without doing that, I was going to end up with the same thing time and time again.
Right. So, Rick first became visible when he wrote a book called The Price of Heartbreak, and really with the intention to help others suffering from intense emotional heartbreak and feel that they're not alone. And this book, I would say, and other people have said, is a really refreshing take on the struggles of human existence from the eyes of a man who has opened his heart to emotional vulnerability and enlightenment. And, with suicide being the leading cause of death in men under 50, I think about 1 in 5 people suffering from mental health problems. Rick has been on a mission to raise awareness about emotional struggle and helping others who are suffering emotionally. And I think you've really demonstrated in this book, that it's possible to heal from failed relationships and transform your life in the process. And the other thing that I was really loving is, I've often thought it's so interesting to me sometimes when men climb mountains and, you've climbed Kilimanjaro and go whitewater rafting and do all of these, I would call them terrifying, life-threatening experiences. And then we get into these, emotional abysses, right? And there's a sense of like, oh my God, but I might die, which it does feel like, but I also have the sense of like, yes, and, you could have actually died in this other, way. So I love that you've actually done both.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we're all humans, and somebody I was talking to the other day made a comment about, my gosh, talking about not being alone. There's 7 billion people in the world. And, when you do the math, when there's like 8 to 10 different emotions that we all experience, I mean, there's no way that no one's alone. And the only reason why we climb out of that is we have to be vocal about it. We have to communicate. And that's what men, myself, and, I found that really, really hard to do, but once I put that sort of foot in front of the other, I realized how much, other people resonated with what I was going through. And, it just opened up the door. Interesting experience. What I was saying, you're a guy and you've written this book, and there was another, we were out to having a dinner one night. There was a guy sitting across the table from me, macho guy, a pilot doing his thing, and he said, well, what's your book about? And I was really, really sheepish about it because, again, it's that whole macho kind of stereotype. Right. And I would have loved to say, well, it was about climbing Kilimanjaro and Dama Van and, all those macho things. But it's like, I hesitated, and I kind of fumbled over my words trying to explain that it was kind of an emotional journey that I had gone through, and I've kind of bared my heart about it. It was difficult initially, but once I kind of got it out there, he went, hey, yeah, like I know where you're coming from, because this happened to me. It just opened that door. And I think that's where the bravery kind of comes in, where to make that first step. And because people have all this stuff going on inside them. Yeah. And sometimes if somebody just says, hey, are you okay? Or what do you think of this? They know, right. They get
the courage. The courage to go first, I find. And I think, when in relationship, no matter what gender, or in friendship, or just like you said, with a colleague or something, it's so often I've seen with my clients that when they have the courage to go first, not always, people don't always meet us there, but we never know if they will until we do. So
yeah, exactly. Until you try. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you take us into a moment of, maybe right at the end of this breakup, or as you were struggling to kind of find your way, and help men understand really, what was the depth of the pain and struggle you experienced? And then I want to, kind of move forward from there into how you found your way into this deepening or waking up.
Yeah. Interesting, because what was interesting for me, and some of the, I realized two things. First of all, this all started out as a journal. It was never meant to be a book.
Yeah.
And then a couple of months later, I went to Bali for 3 weeks to finish the book. That didn't happen. Going to be a book. But I'm sitting in this. Yeah, the book that was going to be the book. So, okay, well, the book, it wasn't really supposed to be a book initially when I started. It was more of a journal than anything else. And then when I got some feedback from some friends of mine that said, no, this is good stuff. Maybe there's something here that could, help other people. I went to Bali for 3 weeks. And the first week I kind of struggled writing, and, because I would write kind of on the moment and what I was feeling on the moment. And then I Googled vulnerability, and Brene Brown's name came up, and she had just finished writing her third book. And for the next 2 weeks, I just read all of her books and didn't do any writing, because, what I had realized was, you talked about courage earlier. It's like vulnerability is all about that. And I was kind of ticking the boxes, like I'm the poster boy for vulnerability, and I used to avoid it all my life. And here I was now trying to face that. So after going through all of Brene Brown's books, they were all really, really interesting, and she's an amazing, amazing person, and all the research she's done. And I realized that if I was ticking all the boxes to the vulnerability, the poster child for vulnerability, and it really made me resonate with a lot of things that was going on in my life in the past. One of the interesting things about it is that I was reliving all those, good times of this past relationship, and they were very, very vivid in my mind. So it's I think it's been, actually, research has already proven that, emotional and physical pain are actually the very same thing. Like your mind doesn't distinguish between one or the other.
Right. And you described in the book, and as I've felt myself, you actually literally felt the pain in your heart, right? Like,
yes, that was weird. Like, the center of my chest was just, even talking about it now, I can still feel it a bit. But it's just like somebody's got a hand around your heart and just
Yeah, like a
squeeze
vice
all
grip or
through it.
something.
Oh yeah, and
Yeah.
it's like, and and in those moments, and this is where kind of mindfulness kind of sort of stepped into my world again, where there were some days where I was just hurting that much and just wallowing in my own grief, my choice, obviously, that I would just want that squeeze to be harder. Like I would feel that pain for
Mm.
everything it was, because I knew that at some point, like I was going to get through this. I mean, everything that has a beginning has an end.
Well, and
And
how did you know that? Because I think there are some men who start this journey and experience the heartbreak, and it's more emotionally intense than they've ever experienced before. And they're
yeah,
like, am I actually going to get through this?
yeah. Well, like I said, everything passes. Like, I mean, and this is where kind of, like I said, mindfulness comes in. Like everything, your thoughts do not make you the person that your thoughts think that you are.
Right.
You are not your thoughts.
Yeah.
So, and you have control over that. So everything, I mean, use the analogy that I don't know of anybody I've ever met in my life that was stuck in a traffic jam that was there a week later. You know,
Uh-huh.
it moves eventually. It
No,
moves
that's a
on.
good one.
Yeah. I mean, it moves on, and the only way it stays, it doesn't move on, is that you hold on to it,
Right.
and you try to fight it, and it's almost like a storm coming back on itself. It just sits inside you, and the more you concentrate on it,
Right.
the more you want to like get rid of it, or not acknowledge it. It
Yes.
just magnifies.
Well, and
So
that is kind of the what happens, when somebody gets depressed, it's often this not feeling it, not facing it. And often I've had clients who are like, "Oh God, I don't want to open the floodgates. I might never stop crying." And as you're saying, I often say to them, you will stop. I mean, you might cry for a long time, but this is
but
actually
that's
the only way to get to the other side.
You're right, and that's the release. I mean, cry if you have to. I mean, I remember, laying in bed, and staring at the ceiling, and then rolling over and watch the clock tick over digit by digit, and and then finally the sun goes down, and then there was no reason to get out of bed, and it was
Yeah.
like wait there until the next morning, and
Yeah.
that's very lethargic. It's yeah, it does pass, whether we want to believe that at that time, it does pass. And if it's letting that emotional release out, crying or talking to people, and then as a result doing that crying, which big boys don't cry, as we all know, and that's the way I grew up.
Right.
You have to break through that. You have to break through that boundary, and that blockade sort of thing. And
Do you have a
it's
sense of how you broke through that? How you actually allowed yourself and, did away with those messages of strong men don't cry, big boys don't cry?
yeah.
That how did you let yourself actually cry and go there?
Um, I mean, I like I'll never go on a date with somebody to a movie that's like very emotionally charged, like a chick flick. I'm not doing that, because I'm the guy that ends up crying. Um,
Well,
seriously.
now, but it sounds like before you weren't, right? So what was
Uh,
the access point for you?
well, I was that person, but I suppressed it.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that was always there. That never went away. That
Yeah.
was always there. It's just acknowledging that it was there, and letting it come to the surface.
Right.
And I would do that alone initially,
Yeah.
and then once I started, opening up a little bit more, and people were there, and supported me and helped me, that made the difference. That gave me the sort of the courage and the bravery to kind of take that next step forward into saying like,
Into
okay, I need to fix this.
Yeah. I mean, and
But
I'll say as a woman, and as a woman who's worked with men for a long time, I've gotten to experience, hundreds or thousand or so men who have cried with me. And, it moves me every time. I can't think of a memory where I've looked at a man crying and thought, oh, that makes him a wimp, or, oh, that makes him weak. It's like, oh my God, I'm getting to see this part of his heart that most people never get to see. And this is
yeah,
so beautiful and precious. And
and I wish
how
all
can
women
I,
thought that way.
yeah, I
I
know.
wish
Like, how can I help him
they
see
had, yeah, and the thing is that, but what are the best things about actually crying your heart out? Like afterwards, that there's just such a feeling of relief
Yes.
sort of burden off your shoulders. You know, it was like, because you were allowed to do that, whoever it is that you were with embraced that, and what did it without judging you. And that's, you know, we feel so judged sometimes, and that's a real shame.
Yeah, it is.
And that's a whole nother word, obviously, but yeah.
So you said, you know, that part of you, the one who could cry your heart out and would cry, was always there, but I still am curious, right? Like you ended up in this breakup, and then all of a sudden, did you just start crying, or did you have to do something to let yourself be able to release?
Well, it was a huge sense of loss. I mean, loss, you know, people have a hard time dealing with loss, and that has many forms. And then I started reading about it. And then I read a book that a friend of mine gave me called Writing from the Heart by Nancy Aroney. And then I really started to write. And lots of times when I was writing, I wouldn't even remember what I was writing. And now I go back to it, and I still do today. And the emotion actually would still be there for quite a while. But
so did the emotion come through or come out more as you were actually writing about it?
Yeah, because now I was acknowledging it. Yeah. Now I was getting it out of my system somehow, and I needed to do that. I couldn't sleep. Like I couldn't eat. I couldn't do anything. You know, I didn't. You know, I was sort of kind of self-employed, where I didn't have to be at an office, and you know, in any way, shape, or form. So my days were just kind of a blur. Yeah. And you know, something had to give, and that's the route I took, and it worked. Thank God.
Yeah. Well, right. And it's great because for you, it was writing. For other, you know, men, it might be music, or it might be a safe, trusted person, you know, to do that with. It might be reading, it might be watching movies that are tear jerkers or whatever. But, you know, I'm really appreciating you saying, like, wow, you were in this place in this time. Some part of you trusted that you were going to get through this, but some other part was, you know, devastated and miserable. You know, I was reading this part of your book where it says, you know, I'd bled and I'd hurt and I'd experienced emotional pain like I'd never experienced before. And in the end, you know, became a much more balanced person by taking time for yourself and actually searching for who you were.
Yeah. It's interesting because in that particular relationship, I thought, you know, I was fully emotionally invested in it, you know, and that was, you know, and that's the key, the emotional investment. You know, the higher the emotional investment, the higher the vulnerability, and the higher the heartbreak, should things not work out. But the thing is that if you don't go there, then you're not living. You know, one of the things I learned from it was that, you know, my heart will never be broken to that extent ever again, because I learned so much from it. You know, and I've got tools. Oh, absolutely. You know, and I've got tools that I know that got me through that I still use today. So here's the thing.
Oh, I see. So wait, so when you say, before you go on, I just want to see, because you said your heart will never be broken to that extent again, like you may feel heartbreak again, but now that you have the tools to actually be with it, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. I'm more self-aware than I ever have been in my life.
Right.
And that's the huge part. Like I understand, I even in my body, like I know when it's happening, you know, because lots of people don't. I mean, they're on automatic, and all of a sudden they're angry, they're sad, or whatever, and they don't even know how they got there.
Which is a really great point, because, you know, in my practice, whether you want to call it a growth practice, spiritual practice, you know, there's a lot of inquiry into what's happening in this moment in my body and my emotions. Yeah. And, you know, for you too, it sounds like, and when you're not doing that, I think it can just, you know, strike you upside the head or blindside you in such a way that when you are actually paying attention to that, you know, it doesn't. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. Because what happens if you're not paying attention, you react. And then when you react, the world around you has a reaction, which then it becomes cyclical. You know, it just zooms back around the other side, and then you get these more emotions being substantiated by people's negative reactions towards you, and then you respond, or then you react again. The difference between, you know, recognizing what's going on with you and your feelings in your body, and things happen in different parts of your body, is that once you realize that's happening, now you have the capability to respond rather than to react. If that makes sense. Yes. So so it's And that way, it helps you in a particular relationship that you're in. Like, it helps that other person too, because now, they're not dealing with the reaction. They're actually dealing with the response that maybe they can understand.
Right. Where you could witness it and say, wow, I'm feeling a lot of pain that started after you just said, whatever you said, versus lashing out or attacking or having that really strong reaction from what that person just said.
Because you're just going to get a similar reaction.
Right.
And then, it's like, when an argument starts where you always do this, you never do that. And then the first thing you do is you try to defend yourself. No, I don't always do that. Well, the argument is lost. I mean, it just turns into a spiraling fight where you're not going to get anywhere, because now you've got one person being defensive, one person being accusatory, and that's a no-win situation. And I've been in that situation before. Yep. Whereas if you, like you just illustrated, like if you say, like, in this particular moment, what you just did, made me feel this way, that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
That's a very different conversation where, well, maybe my time management needs to be better. It's like, and now you're getting someplace, because that's a give and take. That's not that's not an attack and defend situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, I mean, how deep this all goes, whether you're in a relationship or in a breakup or whatever, right? There's a lot of heartache. And I was appreciating, I can't remember which part of your book that you were saying this, but it's like, the vulnerability is, as soon as we open ourselves to love, we open ourselves to heartbreak. And I experienced a breakup not that long ago where, there was a month after where I thought, for the first time in my life, I thought, maybe I don't want to do this again. I mean, this is miserable. This feels horrible. But as you said, time passed and the heart does heal. And so, I want to hear.
Yeah, you're right. We never forget. I mean, and we shouldn't forget.
Yeah.
I mean, we can forgive, but we should never forget, because, I think it was Rumi that said, something along the lines of, be grateful for whoever comes, because each one has been sent as a guide.
That's beyond. One of my favorite poems from The Guest House.
Yeah, I love Rumi, and the thing is it's so true, because, and I went through that process, when I was after the breakup, where I blamed her, and she was horrible, and she was this and that, and she wasn't. She's a beautiful soul, absolutely. But that was my way of trying to justify how I felt.
Yes, let's talk about that more, because it sounds like you made the shift from feeling that kind of venom of blame and shame to then actually shifting that. So how did you do that?
Well, it's, the whole thing it's about truth, and being true to yourself. And the thing is that, I mean, you can lie to everybody else in the world, but the biggest travesty is to lie to yourself, because no matter what happens, or no matter what you talk yourself into as being what you think is what happened or should have happened or whatever, the reality is that the truth is always just the truth, and that remains unchanged until you actually look at yourself in the mirror and say, okay, I'm accountable for this somehow, because I was in this. So, what are the truths that I need to face? So when you wake up in the morning and you actually look at yourself in the mirror and you start to say, yeah, I get that, then you stop blaming other people, because we do have that choice. I mean, we don't.
When you say I get that, what are you referring to?
I get the fact that I was responsible for some of this happening. Not all of it. I mean, every relationship is 50-50. I can take 50% of responsibility, another person has to take. You can't take, the thing is, what I was doing is I was taking 100% responsibility. And that wasn't fair to me. Like, I took that all on myself, like I made this happen. I manifested this, for whatever reason, it's like, it's all my fault. And, I could have done better. And you go back and you look at all the times when you could have done things differently, but you never remember the times when, they could have done things differently, or,
Right. And either of these, it sounds like these are two opposite sides of the coin. One is blaming, shaming, attacking outward. One is blaming, shaming, attacking inward. And then you sound like you found this way to, and I felt this in your book, where it was like, you said something like, our relationship or our time together deserved a
better outcome. Yes, it deserved a better outcome, and it does now, for sure. And I knew that would take the passage of time for me to get there.
Yeah.
and she's moved on with her life, and she's been with somebody else for a couple of years. And when you're with somebody for a couple of years, I'm sure that you're in a happier place, all that kind of stuff. And what's interesting is that when the sharpness comes out of that pain, it becomes a little bit more numbing, and then you move on to something where, Dr. Seuss, okay, green eggs and ham. I mean, that's all I ever remembered him for, and yet he's got these these compelling sayings that said, "Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened, because it happened for a reason. It made me a much, much better person. It made me go into places that I didn't want to go, and it made me acknowledge who I was and who I didn't want to be anymore." And even my son, God love him, he said to me one day, he said, "Dad, like, who are you? Like, what are you about?" And when you have people like that ask you those types of questions, it's like, whoa, like, and
what do you think had him ask you that? Was it was during the breakup or after the breakup, or was something happening?
No, it was just before the breakup, actually. I think the biggest part about breakups, that's confusing is when lots of breakups that have happened. It's easy to move on because you can pinpoint it to an event, pinpoint it to something that happened or something that didn't happen or whatever the case may be. When you go through a relationship where over the course of a number of months you become disengaged, like it's confusing because you can't put your thumb on anything,
right?
And that's why I went through, and this is why I went through, this huge circle of trying to blame her for anything and everything. And it was wrong. It wasn't,
right.
It
Because you
wasn't
didn't have that one event to pinpoint.
No.
And I'm just thinking too, that a lot of men I've talked to, and women too, have stayed in relationships, knowing full well that they're dying or that there is disconnection. And I think it's such an act of courage to leave a relationship, to work on a relationship also, but also to leave a relationship without that one final blow, right? But just recognizing, we're going in different directions, or we want different things, or one of our hearts or both of our hearts aren't really being met here. It's so courageous.
Well, that actually did happen, in my marriage, actually, which is nothing about the book. But in that particular situation, we looked at each other and we said, like, we're not happy, like, and I knew she was like dying in this relationship. And we made that adult decision, before anything happened, that, let's move forward with our lives. We've got so much to look forward to. So let's do that. It didn't make the aftermath any less painful.
Right.
But we made that adult decision.
Yeah.
Because then I knew my kids were going to be like I was going to be living at a greater distance from my kids. And that was really, really hard, and still is to this day.
That's heartbreaking.
But the thing is that, we looked at each other and said, like, I'm not happy. You're not happy. Let's just do this. And we did, so like I said, all things for a reason. But, the thing about, like you say, people staying in relationships and not knowing why they're there, I mean, that's a real travesty, because we only have one life to live. There's one road that we're looking down, and this is all we've got.
Yep.
And I said to somebody, I had 4 amazing years with this human being that, to the day I die, there will be a part of me that'll always love that.
Yes.
But the thing is that what I also learned from that is, I'm not settling. I'm never going to settle. I'll take 1 year of amazing over 10 years of, it's okay.
Settling. Well, and what do you think? I think this might be an interesting place. This might be too much to cover today, but what do you think about, in the face of settling, what would you now do, right? Like if you were in a situation where it was okay, rather than first just leaving or thinking, well, this isn't going to cut it, is there something you would do differently now?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, you have to be honest with yourself, and, what I've worked on a lot over the last 2 years is loving myself, really liking the person who I am, and if I don't think I'll get to that point where I'm in a situation where it's okay anymore, because, for me, it's, I need to be connected on 3 or 4 different levels, and that needs to be alive all the time and spinning and growing and all that kind of thing. And it takes 2 people to do that. Absolutely. Yep. So, if I ever do find myself in a situation where, this is just turning out to be okay, Well, there's two ways of doing that. Number one, you can leave, absolutely, or you can sit down and have that conversation and say,
yes,
what do we need to do differently here? Because you know what? Yes, relationships are really, really hard work. Like, this is not working for me, and why? Like, how is it working for you? Because when you do it, we're going to get the same result if we keep doing this. Let's not do this anymore.
yeah,
Let's do something different. Let's
I love
reinvent
that.
what we're doing. So, and this is about working at it together. And people obviously in relationships, they're in different places. Some are up, the others down, vice versa. Sometimes you're in sync, but that's life, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
So the whole thing is about communication and saying, like, and putting that vulnerability out there to say, hey, like, I'm not
I
feeling
need
this.
something, right? Yeah, I want
Yes,
something. I
it's
need
okay to
something.
ask.
Yeah, yeah,
It's okay to ask, and that's so
yeah.
important.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. This has been amazing. What do you want to leave men with, on this journey through heartbreak and heartache and waking up, and what do you want men to know?
Oh, it's really, really clear for me. I mean, number one is like, hey guys, like, you're not alone. I mean, we're all going through this, and you need to talk about it, and that's the single biggest thing. And even for people that have people or know friends that are going through this, just instead of saying, hey, don't worry, you'll get over it, there's more fish in the sea. Why
Mm-hmm.
not just walk up? Why not just walk up and say, how you doing? Are you okay?
Yeah.
Just open that door. They might not be able to open the door themselves, but if friends have people in their lives that are important that are going through this, then it's okay to sit down and say, hey, and you don't have to solve anything. Just sit and
Right.
listen, because and they might cry, and it'll be a huge relief, but the thing is that sometimes just asking somebody, hey, you okay, it's enough to have them kind of make that positive step forward.
Yeah. Right. And I love that you're calling a positive step forward, because it's, not always right. And that men have a hard time seeing it as positive. Oh, I'm going to cry or release it. That's positive, but that actually it is.
Yeah, just a quick one before you go. I mean, like, Brene Brown was doing a book signing after a talk that she was doing, and there was a man and his wife and two
Mm-hmm.
daughters. They came, and they had the book signed, and the wife and the two daughters took their books and they went off, and the man stood there, and she
Yeah.
said, like, I think you might know the story
I love
where,
this story.
yeah, and he says, he asked her a question about her research. She said, well, I study women. And he says, that's convenient. And she says, what do you mean? Because you know what? Because, when men, I understand what shame is, and we get the shit kicked out of us when we talk about shame or we feel that. And she says, those three women over there that you signed those books for, they would rather see me die on my white horse than
Mm-hmm.
fall off,
Yeah.
and that was so profound for me, because we do that to ourselves, and as men, I mean, because of all these society's expectations and stigmatism about who we are supposed to be. And,
Yes.
that
Well, right. And it's
communication
been
takes us out.
interesting. It's been interesting to work with women on that one, to actually help
Yeah.
them welcome more of men's vulnerability and pain. And then also to support men in being able to say to a woman, I need this from you, right? Like, I actually need you to be
Yeah.
with me in this vulnerable place. And if you feel disgust, or if you want to run, or you don't feel attracted to me, or any of these things, like, there's some work that you need to do on this too, because we
Yeah.
need to be able to share these things, and to come from that kind of strength of and worth to hold. I get to share my vulnerability, and someone
Yeah.
else's response doesn't make me bad or wrong.
Exactly. I mean, we're emotional beings too, although we hide it very well. And the thing is that, oh my God, like, we'll crawl across broken glass
Yeah.
for a mile to a woman that will look at us and tell us that she loves us, and we feel that.
Mm,
We die for that. We die for that.
mm, Thank you. Thank you so much for being here today, and for, the journey and the work you've done, and for supporting other men with this.
Thank you very much for having me, Shada. It was brilliant.
Yeah. How can men find you?
Oh, there's Rick Sharp, SHARPE.com. Website's going to go live very, very shortly. There's a blog there. The whole intent of the blog is for people to share their stories, not so much my story, but people to share
Beautiful.
stories. Yeah, and there's links to the book and a bunch of articles I've written for various magazines around, depression and these types of things. But yeah.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope it gives you a sense of what's possible and how good your life can be. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe to Man Alive and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/manalive to get outtakes, videos, and raw footage I only share there. These are some of the most interesting parts of these expert conversations. You can also grab your copy of The Unknown Power to accelerate your career and solidify your confidence with women, because the two are related, and I know you don't have to settle for one or the other. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.